Welcome to the June Lunch and Learn session for the L. Douglas Wilder School of Government and Public Affairs at Virginia Commonwealth University. My name is James Wazalewski, and I'm the Director of Development and Alumni Engagement for the Wilder School. Thank you so much for joining us today. Our session will feature key speaker Amy Wight, Assistant Secretary of Transportation for the Commonwealth of Virginia, as well as our moderator, Associate Dean Robyn McDougle and Dr. Jimmy Chen, on the discussion on the move, vacations, work, school, the role of transportation in a post-COVID Virginia. As a reminder, we are recording this session and the Q&A portion as well. This includes comments in the chat. For those who wish to enable the closed captioning for the live session, please click on the CC Live Transcript icon in your Zoom meeting controls on the bottom of the navigation bar. If you cannot see this button, click on the More icon. From the pop-up box, click the Enable Auto Transcription button. You will also see this information in your chat box. We are pleased to have each of you here for our session as we continue our efforts to engage and involve our community, as well as our alumni and other constituencies. At this time, I would like to introduce Dr. Robyn McDougle, the Associate Dean of Research and Outreach and an Associate Professor of Criminal Justice at the L. Douglas Wilder School of Government and Public Affairs. Associate Dean McDougle.
Thank you so much, James, and thank you everyone for being with us today. I want to take a few minutes to tell you a little bit about the Wilder School. Much I know that you all know, but we have to take the opportunity to brag when we can. The Wilder School, as you know, is a school of government and public affairs that informs public policy through cutting-edge research and community engagement and prepares students to be tomorrow's leaders. We are ranked 38th in the School of Government and Public Affairs, and that is in the top 15% in the nation. We are also the only school in the Commonwealth of Virginia in public affairs that is ranked in all three substantive areas. We are 11,300 alumni strong and have over 1,800 current students. Our academic programs include criminal justice, public administration, urban and regional affairs, Homeland Security and Emergency Management, and Public Policy and Administration. And please take a moment to note the slide that's on the screen in front of you, because it is not too late for you to join one of our graduate programs. As you can see, we've extended our application deadlines for our graduate and certificate programs to July 1st and have extended our Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness deadline to July 25th. You will notice in the chat that you will have the contact information for our recruitment coordinator and a direct link to our graduate programs. I also want to take a minute to talk about the Wilder School's impressive centers and institutes. Our centers and institutes aim to advance research and training that informs public policy, trains current decision makers, and works to improve our communities. And as you know, the Wilder School has always been committed to values of social equity and justice. This has been reflected throughout the years with our nationally recognized programs, research, and awards for our faculty, including the award for our dean, Dr. Susan Gooden, and our school's namesake, the Honorable L. Douglas Wilder. The Wilder School, as you know, is offering our monthly Lunch and Learn sessions that we started last year this time. We hope to use these to engage with our communities, to share topics of interest and relevance. We really do want to hear from you. What topics or future interesting areas would you like for us to discuss? What speakers would you like us to present to you in either this format or another alumni engagement events? That being said, I hope you enjoy today's session, and I would like to take a minute to introduce our moderator, Dr. Jimmy Chen. Dr. Chen is a professor and program chair of the Urban and Regional Studies and Planning program at the L. Douglas Wilder School of Government and Public Affairs. Dr. Chen's research interests include urban and regional planning, urban transportation planning, travel demand forecast modeling, geographic information systems, urban sustainability analysis, as well as urban public policy and management. Dr. Chen received his Ph.D. in urban and regional planning for the University of South Carolina. Dr. Chen, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Dean McDougal, for your detailed introductions. I received my Ph.D. in urban planning from University of Southern California, and I joined the faculty of VCU in 2007. And before joining VCU, I had 17 years of transportation planning experience in Los Angeles and Southern California. And I thoroughly enjoyed my last 14 years, these 14 rewarding years at the VCU. And today we are so excited and so pleased to have our featured guest speaker, Ms. Amy Wight. And I would like to briefly introduce her background. Amy Wight was appointed Assistant Secretary of Transportation by Governor Ralph Northam in July 2018. We are focusing on communications and policies. She supports a safe, reliable, multimodal transportation system that's a platform of Virginia's economy. Wight began working in state government at the Virginia Office of Attorney Generals, where she served the Director of Gang Reduction and Intervention Programs from 2009 to 2014. Wight graduated from Wesley College with a degree in International Relations and is currently enrolled in the Master of Public Administration and a Certificate in Public Management program at the VCU Wider School. She is an active volunteer in the Richmond Great Fulton communities and also volunteers to enhance Richmond theater community. Now it's my privilege and a great honor to present Secretary Wight to you. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Chen, Dr. McDougal, James Wasilewski, and of course, Laura Foy, who helped coordinate today's Lunch and Learn. It is such a pleasure to be here with you today. I really have to start by acknowledging the unprecedented experience that we've all been through together over the past 15 months. 2020 started as a truly exciting year for transportation in Virginia. We had some major projects underway and an omnibus transportation package making its way through the legislature, and then COVID hit. While health and safety have always been a priority, we've really had the light shown on how much that truly is a focus. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. From the port to rail to transit, there was a real commitment to protect the health and safety of our workforce, our customers, and the traveling public, to deliver service, and to manage the financial uncertainty of the time. Over the past year, the Commonwealth has used its transportation assets for the benefit of the nation, ensuring essential supplies and goods got to where they were needed quickly and safely through the Port of Virginia's Critical Cargo Initiative. We are now emerging from this remarkable time with an appreciation for the resiliency and character of the essential workers within the transportation sector, which really serves as the platform for Virginia's economy. Throughout the pandemic, the work that they have done, these frontline transportation workers, to support that platform and multimodal travel choices has been critical to keeping people and the economy moving. So as we prepare to look to the future of transportation, I ask you to pause for a moment and consider where we have been. I present to you a brief video overview of transportation in Virginia.
At the beginning of 2020, none of us could have imagined how this year would be unlike any in our lifetimes. None of us could have imagined the challenges that lay ahead. And none of us could have anticipated all the ways we have adapted, learned, and worked together during an unprecedented global emergency. More than a month before COVID-19 surfaced in the United States, Virginia transportation leadership began aggressively developing new processes, procedures, and solutions in real time. In March, thousands of us transitioned to teleworking. Many of our workspaces were left the way we'd leave them at the end of any workday. But now, with so many of us working from home and in the field, many of our offices remain empty. Had we seen these images months ago, we might have guessed that work had stopped. But that observation could not be further from the truth. Across the Commonwealth, our multimodal transportation system has kept our lives on track without interruption. We've accelerated agency needs and supported one another throughout this unpredictable year. We have adapted at every turn. We have met every familiar challenge with resilience. And as for unfamiliar challenges, well, we've met them with innovation. And if the year 2020 has taught us anything, it's this, that our transportation heroes are right in front of us. Our heroes are the people who keep our roads open, the people who keep our trains, planes, and buses safe and operational, the people who keep our economy open for business. Our people are extraordinary, and they have the means to meet extraordinary challenges. As a result, our multimodal transportation system has not only endured, it has thrived. In 2020, the General Assembly passed the Governor's landmark Omnibus Transportation Bill that restructured the Commonwealth's funding model. We broke ground on the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel Expansion Project, the largest transportation construction project in Virginia's history. We've expanded the capacity and competitiveness at the Port of Virginia. We launched the Transforming Rail in Virginia initiative and established the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority. We created the Transit Ridership Incentive Program to promote improved service and reduce barriers for all people. We established a new environmental subcommittee within the Commonwealth Transportation Board, looking at resilience, sustainability, and the reduction of greenhouse gases. We launched a statewide anti-litter campaign. Virginia is for lovers, not litter. Across the Transportation Secretariat, we embraced our commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and our agencies have surpassed our DBE and SWAM goals. We've seen great innovation at Virginia Space, our zero-emission electric buses, and have seen many more accomplishments and innovations that will have tremendous positive impacts on our lives for years to come. And throughout it all, our focus remains on the health and safety of our employees, our customers, and our partners while we keep Virginia moving. Transportation is the platform for Virginia's economy. Here's to all of our transportation heroes.
Thank you. Next slide, please. One of the great lessons of 2020 was just how fundamental transportation is in people's lives every day, transporting critical goods and creating connections for people to essential work, food, medicine, and now vaccines. Throughout it all, we've had to ask ourselves, how do we preserve the current pipeline of projects? How do we maintain the initiatives we had begun? How do we stabilize and protect our workforce and contribute to the economic recovery of Virginia and the nation? Next slide, please. From the start of the pandemic, Virginia has been better positioned than we would have been because of Governor Northam's 2020 Omnibus Transportation legislation. It was built on a study of the sustainability of transportation funding. Next slide, please. Historically, driving on Virginia's highways has increased, but fuels tax collections have been declining. From 2016 to 2019, driving increased year over year, yet these fuel tax collections went down. In 2019, at the direction of the General Assembly and in collaboration with a group of stakeholders, our transportation team studied this issue. The analysis found that without action, fuels tax collections would continue to decline over the coming years, with the decline accelerating as fuel efficiency continued to rise. The consultant for this effort, KPMG, estimated that in 2030, gas tax collections would be 31% lower than they are today. Yet our transportation infrastructure needs are greater than ever. Next slide, please. The Omnibus Transportation Bill transformed transportation funding by creating the Commonwealth Transportation Fund, a value statement that we in Virginia are committed to creating a truly multimodal transportation system. One of the key provisions of the Omnibus Bill was the Transit Ridership Incentive Program, designed to improve regional transit service and reduce barriers to transit access. Equitable access to transportation is critical. Public transportation has to be available for people who need food, medicine, and to get to their jobs. This program reflects our commitment to continuing to focus on making sure our transportation network is accessible to all Virginians. This generational omnibus legislation was preceded by the Interstate Funding Bill passed during the 2019 General Assembly session, which established a dedicated funding source to address safety and reliability issues along the I-81 corridor and on interstates across the Commonwealth. And prior to that, landmark legislation was passed to create dedicated funding for Metro, which meant a reliable revenue stream for critical capital projects, $500 million annually, for the first time since its trains began rolling in 1976. But even with all of these historic funding measures in place, the pandemic created financial uncertainty. The three major transportation revenue sources, the fuel tax, the retail sales tax, and the motor vehicle sales tax, all experienced significant declines in FY20. This resulted in a reduction of $750 million of funding, impacting every transportation district in Virginia. For reference, some of you may be familiar with our data-driven project prioritization process, SmartScale. In the most recent round, SmartScale had $860 million available statewide for transportation projects. Next slide, please. During a special session of the General Assembly last year, Governor Northam introduced a budget amendment that was essentially a cash management strategy. It created flexibility for the Commonwealth Transportation Board, the CTB, to utilize funding allocated to projects in years 1 or 2 of a 6-year plan that don't need the funding until the out years, years 4, 5, and 6. This flexibility has allowed us to keep projects moving while also getting essential people, goods, and supplies where they need to go. Not having to delay projects has been critical for keeping thousands of people in our industry employed and moving forward projects to improve Virginians' quality of life. Next slide, please. While we've always known the role of transportation in our economy, the pandemic has shown a light on just how fundamental transportation is as a lifeline to essential workers. Our transportation network is a true multimodal platform for Virginia's inclusive economy. This unparalleled transportation system includes roads, bridges, highways, rail, transit, metro, ferries and barges, pedestrian and bike connections, aviation, 66 airports, the Port of Virginia, and a spaceport. Transformative infrastructure investments across the system are allowing us to deliver critical improvements that are making life better for our citizens. Next slide, please. Because every travel corridor has unique challenges and circumstances, in 2018, the Commonwealth began engaging in corridor planning studies that analyze all modes of transportation across the north-south I-81 and I-95 and the east-west 64 and 66 corridors. Performance-based corridor-wide planning studies provide a holistic approach to problem identification and serve as the basis for targeted solutions that most effectively address the underlying transportation issues. A study of Interstate 81, which is a significant freight route, led to the I-81 Corridor Improvement Plan. The Virginia General Assembly passed legislation in 2019 and 2020, providing dedicated funding to support capital improvements and operational enhancements on the I-81 corridor and Virginia's other interstates, including 95 and 64. These corridor plans will provide significant improvements to our transportation network. The implementation of the I-81 Corridor Improvement Plan alone is expected to result in 450 fewer crashes and 6 million fewer hours of delay each year. A recent I-95 study revealed that widening I-95 by 1 lane in each direction for 50 miles would cost $12.5 billion. While the cost is staggering, the most sobering part of the analysis is that by the time we are finished with construction in 10 years, the corridor would be just as congested as it is today. That finding led Virginia to rail, which could provide the additional capacity along the corridor at 1/3 of the cost. Next slide, please. With limited transportation revenues, we must be resourceful, leveraging every dollar through partnerships, innovative financing, and rethinking how we fund transportation. As I mentioned, the 2020 Omnibus Transportation Bill restructured the transportation funding model, streamlining our funding and making a financial commitment to a multimodal system through the establishment of a unified Commonwealth Transportation Fund through which all transportation dollars flow. But it also supports our $3.7 billion Transforming Rail in Virginia initiative by establishing the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority. This initiative is an example of bringing together passenger, commuter, and freight rail partners to address a significant rail bottleneck connecting the Northeast and Southeast corridors with a new long bridge across the Potomac. This will improve rail operations all along the I-95 corridor for both passenger and freight, and it will establish a pathway to separate passenger and freight rail in the future. In 2019, 6 state-sponsored Amtrak trains moved nearly 1 million passengers across the Commonwealth. Over the next 10 years, the Transforming Rail in Virginia initiative will double the number of Virginia-sponsored Amtrak trains, providing nearly hourly service between Richmond and Washington, D.C., increase VRE, Virginia Railway Express, commuter service by 60%, lay the foundation for a Southeast high-speed rail corridor, preserve an east-west freight corridor, and create the potential to expand rail all across the Commonwealth. Next slide, please. The pandemic delayed implementation of some of our priorities, but over the next year, we're focused on sustaining commitments set forth in the Omnibus Bill. I mentioned the Transit Ridership Incentive Program, also the Interstate Operations and Enhancement Program. This was funded through 2019 in the Interstate Funding Bill and codified in the Omnibus Bill, with a goal of improving the safety, reliability, and travel flow along our interstate corridors. Moving forward, we will work closely with the General Assembly to address the budget shortfall over the next few years, utilizing the budget flexibility, prioritizing federal COVID dollars, and phasing in the revenue provisions of the Omnibus Bill. With limited resources, we are leveraging state, regional, and local funding to deliver 3,900 projects over the next 6 years across the Commonwealth. We will continue to utilize unique multilateral partnerships, as we've done with Amtrak, VRE, and CSX through the Transforming Rail in Virginia initiative, and lead the nation with P3s, which we're using to manage congestion and deliver a 90-mile integrated network of uninterrupted express lanes in Northern Virginia. We will develop and expand revolutionary workforce initiatives like VDOT's Workforce of Tomorrow to prioritize inclusion and equity as we better understand the skills that will be required in the future. Virginia maintains more than 57,000 lane miles, the third largest state-maintained highway system in the country. While highways will always be an important component of our transportation network, they are only one piece of an interconnected system. As traffic volumes on our interstates are beginning to return to 95% of pre-pandemic volumes, we are looking to the future, incorporating lessons from the past. How can we better meet transportation demand with innovative solutions such as passenger and commuter rail, buses, microtransit, and transportation demand management? In the Hampton Roads region, we are engaged in a $5 billion program of projects to address congestion along some of the worst segments of I-64. The $3.8 billion Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel Expansion Project, the largest construction project in Virginia's history, will increase tunnel and interstate capacity along 9.9 miles of Interstate 64 between Hampton and Norfolk, reducing congestion and easing access to the Port of Virginia and the world's largest naval base. Next slide, please. In Northern Virginia, a regional multimodal mobility program, RM3P for short, is being developed to use real-time data to help travelers make informed decisions about their travel behavior. The program is funded through the Commonwealth's Innovation, Technology, and Transportation Fund and aims to improve safety and reliability. Another example of innovation is the Driver Alcohol Detection System for Safety, or DADS. which is a public-private partnership between the Automotive Coalition for Traffic Safety and the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. The first generation system is designed for fleet vehicles, and the operators emit a puff of breath directed towards a small sensor in the steering column or on the side door trim. The next generation system, which should be available for use in consumer vehicles by 2024, is designed to be passive and will enable measurements of specific alcohol concentrations up to 0.08%, the legal limit in most states. The Department of Rail and Public Transportation is managing another innovative program to improve mobility known as the Virginia Microtransit Deployment Initiative. Through a Federal Transit Administration Integrated Mobility Innovation Grant, DRPT is launching two 18-month pilot projects in Gloucester County and Wise, Virginia, beginning later this month. Using the transit agency's existing vehicles and drivers, Public Mobility Solutions provider VIA's microtransit platform will handle dispatch, pickup, and routing of the vehicles, similar to other rideshare apps. The service zones for this initiative were specifically targeted to provide affordable and efficient transportation for high need and underserved communities, helping connect people to jobs, healthcare, and resources. All of these projects and initiatives are undertaken with environmental stewardship in mind. Next slide, please. Across the Transportation Secretariat, we are partnering with other agencies, private companies, and nonprofits to protect and preserve our environment. In 2019, VDOT executed a $1.5 million MOU with the Virginia Institute of Marine Science to develop proactive strategies for addressing sea level rise, recurrent flooding impacts, and habitat disturbance related to existing and planned transportation infrastructure. Secretary Valentine also established an environmental subcommittee of the Commonwealth Transportation Board with a mission to develop recommendations for the CTB on goals and policies to mitigate the impacts of the transportation system on the environment and the impacts of climate change on transportation infrastructure. As you may know, Virginia is one of 16 states to have enacted legislation setting specific greenhouse gas reduction goals, setting a target within the Virginia Energy Plan to achieve net zero emissions by 2045. To help meet this goal, Virginia has initiated a greenhouse gas emissions pilot to establish quantitative measures to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the transportation sector. Last year, the Transportation Secretariat launched its statewide Virginia is for Lovers Not Litter campaign to raise awareness about Virginia's litter challenge and to promote ways to preserve Virginia's picturesque roadways, landscapes, and views. I encourage all of you to visit loversnotlitter.org and sign the pledge to do your part to keep Virginia clean. We also have an active pollinator habitat program. Since 2012, VDOT has planted pollinator habitat at 21 rest areas. The agency also employs conservation mowing practices, no mowing between March 31st and November 1st, to protect pollinator habitat. And VDOT has joined several other states as members of the Monarch Butterfly Candidate Conservation Agreement with Assurances, a formal voluntary conservation agreement with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services, and non-federal partners to address and implement conservation needs for this at-risk species. Next slide. In closing, since the beginning of the Northam administration, our team has built our transportation program on 3 pillars: execution, executing with excellence. We have a 6-year improvement program with 3,900 projects and an investment of $21.4 billion for fiscal years 22 through 27. Innovation, not just in technology, but also in how we approach and solve our problems, all with limited resources, to deliver vital infrastructure, increase mobility, improve safety, enhance our quality of life, and create communities in which people want to live. And third, deliberately tying transportation decisions to economic competitiveness and opportunity. Our seaports, airports, spaceport, bridges, tunnels, and highways serve as global gateways for the Commonwealth, opening Virginia to economic opportunity by creating access to regional, national, and world markets. the Commonwealth is committed to a multimodal transportation that moves people and goods safely and reliably, connecting communities and improving mobility for everyone. I'm happy to take your questions.
Thank you so much, Secretary Wight, for your wonderful and informative presentation. Thank you so much. Yeah, we are now entering the Q&A session. Before taking questions from the audience, I just have some initial question to ask you. Yeah, hopefully you can answer it. Question number one, what are the most important and transportation-related legislative matters facing Virginia right now? I know the Commonwealth has lots of legislative matters. What are some of the most important and transportation-related legislative matters facing Virginia right now?
Sure. Well, I think I'll begin with what has already happened. In the 2020 session, you all may remember that the legislature authorized DMV to issue driver privilege cards to individuals who may not meet the requirements for a driver's license, but do meet certain other requirements. And that's really been a critical service. So DMV began doing that on January 2nd of this year, and so far has issued nearly 15,000 driver privilege cards. So the agency is working very closely with a number of organizations in the community and with the immigrant community to ensure that everyone understands how to apply for a driver privilege card and what the process looks like, and that language is not a barrier. So they offer the knowledge test in Spanish as well as 25 other languages. And for the road test, individuals are allowed to bring an interpreter with them. So this has really been an important piece of legislation, and it's just getting implemented now, and we're really proud of the progress that's been made. Also in 2020, in the governor's omnibus bill, there was a direction to the commissioner of the DMV to establish a mileage-based user fee pilot to work with a work group and understand what that's going to look like. So there are many states that are exploring this way of funding transportation in the future as vehicle efficiency continues to increase. We're finding that motor fuels tax revenues are going to continue to decrease. So we have to find an equitable way for all users of the transportation system to pay their part, their share of upkeep for the system. So the mileage-based user fee is one way to do that. So we are joining the Eastern Transportation Coalition, previously known as the I-95 Coalition, in looking at whether the mileage-based user fee might be a feasible alternative. And then I think also important, and you guys are no doubt aware of the 2020 Senate Joint Resolution 50, which established the Commonwealth Corridor Passenger Study. So it asked the Department of Rail and Public Transportation to look at east-west connections, connecting Hampton roads, Richmond, and the New River Valley. So that will help us establish a truly statewide network of passenger rail. And then I think finally, another important aspect of our transportation system is multi-use trails. These connect communities in active transportation. So commuters who may want to bike to work instead of taking the bus or driving. So the legislature directed us in 2021 budget language. So just recently, they asked the Office of Intermodal Planning and Investment to convene a work group and start looking at ways to fund multi-use trails and a prioritization process for development of trail projects. So we're really excited to get started on all of those. And I think those are some of the most interesting and pressing legislative matters before us right now.
Thank you so much, Secretary Wight. Relating to the equity, I just have a follow-up question relating to equities. Why do we need to study transit equity and modernization in Virginia? What is the context and the background? And besides DRPT and the GRTC, what other transportation agencies are involved in this process? Because it's related to transit equity.
Yeah, I think transit equity and modernization is really important. And the legislature also directed us to study, directed the Department of Rail and Public Transportation to study transit equity and modernization. And we know that economic opportunity depends on access to transportation. So it is critical that everyone be able to access some form of transportation to get to the jobs, the healthcare, education. We started working on modernization and transparency in our transit system back in 2018. The DRPT launched their MERIT, I have to always look this up, Making Efficient Responsible Investments in Transit program to look at transit capital funding. So it's a priority process, but it's also performance-based. And the larger urban transit systems are now required to complete strategic plans and work with the Department of Rail and Public Transportation to do so. So this is building equity and transparency into the process. And then the study that we mentioned, HJR 542 from the 2021 General Assembly, asked DRP to look over the course of 2 years at transit services and engagement opportunities for underserved and underrepresented communities. So they're looking at transit accessibility, adequacy of transit infrastructure, electrification of the transit fleet, implementation of emerging technology, safety, and system engagement. So there's a real focus on engaging underrepresented communities, and I think this is going to be a really exciting opportunity over the next 2 years. They've begun that work, and will be submitting a final report in August of 2022.
Wonderful, thank you so much. My last question before taking other audience question is, what efforts has the state government made in accelerating clean transportation, electrified transportation fleet, promoting public transit, and facilitating transit-oriented development? Because state has a lots of innovative initiatives. So would you please just elaborate on the efforts state government has made in this kind of initiatives? Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. I think the most exciting component here is an electric vehicle readiness study we conducted in 2020. As we mentioned during the presentation earlier, by 2030, the motor vehicle sales tax is going to go down because of efficiency in vehicles. Part of that is we're expecting 12% of Virginia's new car sales to be electric vehicles by 2030. Right now, Virginia ranks 11th for the number of electric vehicle charging stations across the Commonwealth, with 700 public charging stations, in case anyone's curious. And we really looked at opportunities for further developing our infrastructure and improving existing infrastructure to accommodate this growing prevalence of EVs in the coming years. So there were a number of areas where we've made some progress and a number of areas where we're continuing to work. And then when we look at some of the more traditional methods of meeting that multimodal need, we look at transit demand management. DRPT recently completed an update to the Interstate 66 Transit and Transportation Demand Management Plan. And part of that is better communication and coordination with the Commuter Choice Program that's run by NVTC. And it dedicates a portion of the toll revenues along certain corridors to multimodal projects in those corridors. So it's a really exciting way to fund these transportation needs and help increase person throughput in those corridors through these express lanes, and then dedicate a portion of that revenue back into multimodal. So we're really excited about that. And then I think finally, I would say that the Transit Ridership Incentive Program I talked a little bit about during the presentation. It's looking at interconnectivity between points, especially rural areas, and then also looking at how to reduce barriers to transit access. And so it's really barriers for everyone. But one component of that has been, and in this past year and in the coming year, funding for zero fare pilots at our transit agencies. So we're looking into whether just having to pay a fare is a barrier for some people who have to rely on transit to get to work or to get to school or the grocery store. So really excited about what will come out of that. And that's a program that we're just starting to implement now. It was delayed due to the pandemic. And we think that will help with our work through the VTrans, Long Range Transportation Plan, in transit-oriented development, and making sure that we know what those barriers are and how to get people on transit.
That's excellent, wonderful questions. Now I can move on to some Q&A from, you can answer some questions from general audience. The first question is from Dr. Jose Alcan, and his question is, does the transportation bill include allocations for bicycle and bicycle infrastructures to include this mode of transportation as a part of overall considerations and as a viable mode of transportation? Basically, his question about the active transportation, talk about bicycles. Does the transportation bill include allocation for bicycle and bicycle infrastructures?
So the transportation planning that the state does is in terms of bicycles on roadways is for state maintained highways. So the bicycles on highways would probably be an unsafe idea there, but within cities, it's the responsibility of the city to build in those bike lanes. I can say though, that we are actively supporting what Dr. Chen just mentioned, active transportation, through investment in multi-use trails. So these are trails for bikes, pedestrians, for people to be able to get, it's not just for entertainment, but also for people to be able to get to work and to travel between communities. So we're looking a lot more at active transportation. And in the city of Richmond, for example, there are 2 separate trail systems that connect downtown, and then from there can connect into the bus network or a variety of other ways to get around, the train network even. So both the Virginia Capitol Trail and the Fall Line Trail connect downtown. So we're looking at more and more of those. And I think this study on how to fund and how to prioritize these multi-use trail projects is really going to lead to an increased commitment to these projects and an increased use an increased focus on how we incorporate all the other pieces of transportation in. But I know Secretary Valentine has made it a real focus of hers to look at how we make our transportation system truly multimodal. And the first step to that really was the governor's 2020 Omnibus Transportation Bill. By creating that Unified Transportation Fund, now all of these other methods, and especially transit and commuter rail and passenger rail, and now bike paths and all of these other non-traditional, non-highway forms of transportation, have a better opportunity to receive dedicated funding. So long-winded way to answer that, but we are looking at bicycles and we would like to incorporate all forms of transportation into our system.
Thank you so much. Thank you. The next question is from audience, Verena Dixon's. The question is, what role can public transportation play to advance community and commercial development? What role can public transit play to advance community and commercial development?
Mm-hmm. So that's something as we've considered. I think a perfect example would be the Route 1 corridor in Northern Virginia. In preparation for Amazon's HQ2 to come into that area, we looked at a lot of different projects to develop pedestrian, bicycle, transit, all of these other modes of getting around, and make it a walkable community and make it a place where people don't have to drive. So transit is a huge component of this, and a lot of planning has gone into that corridor especially. And it's not just the Route 1 corridor. There are also some projects around metro stations, and we're looking at all of the ways to make that community less single occupancy vehicle reliant. So that's happening all over the state. And I think that's a great question. And we have a very active Department of Rail and Public Transportation that works very closely with transit agencies across the state to find new ways to promote transit as well, make sure everybody knows what the options are. And I mentioned the fare-free pilots that are happening across the state. So I think we're really looking at the transit system and trying to understand how we can increase ridership, what these barriers are, and what we can do to help people.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. the next question from another anonymous audience. The question is, as you roll out these programs over the next several decades, what role do you vision electric vehicle EVs will have in the urban community planning and achieving 2045 emission goals? So this question basically talk about the role for electric vehicles. Yeah, electric vehicles. What's the role in the emission?
So I think they'll play an increasingly larger role in what our state transportation planning looks like. And that was really the purpose of that electric vehicle readiness study that we undertook in 2020. We wanted to understand where Virginia's capacity is now and where we need to get to be able to accommodate a growing fleet of electric vehicles. I can say that some state agencies have begun looking at replacing some of their traditional vehicles, their diesel-powered vehicles, with electric. The Port of Virginia, for example, has a green operator program, and they encourage, it's a voluntary program, but they encourage the truck operators who do business with the port to replace older, more polluting vehicles with newer models. And in some cases, those are electric models. The port has also replaced some of its diesel-powered cargo equipment with all electric equipment. The governor made several different announcements about funding for electric buses across the state. So we're working to help transit systems replace their bus fleets with electric vehicles. And so all of that's going to rely on charging infrastructure. There are some federal regulations that may need to change. So there are a lot of factors that we have to look at to get ready for electric vehicles. But Virginia really is well positioned starting this early at looking at what we need to do and having those conversations. I think it's really going to be helpful that we are part of that Eastern Transportation Coalition. Those states, I think it's 16 states and DC along the Eastern Seaboard make up 40% of the US population and a good deal of the US's economic output as well. So this is a corridor with significance to the whole nation. And partnering with these other states on the mileage-based user fee, but also innovative technology like charging stations, I think is going to be a tremendous opportunity in the coming decade. And it's just a really great move for Virginia to become a member of that coalition.
That's fantastic. I think, thank you. Yeah. Another question is a follow-up question from Dr. Jose Alcan. Yes, he's very happy to see the project investment in rail transit as an alternative to cars. Any other ideas to decenter the car as a primary way of transportation, and how do state conservation interact with the national initiatives? Basically, how do we further decenter the car as the primary ways? What are the considerations besides rail transit? Is this question? Yes.
Yeah, I think if you look at some of the busy travel corridors, such as I-95, for example, we recently completed a study of that corridor. And I mentioned to you earlier that just looking at adding one lane in each direction for 50 miles along the busiest part of 95 between Richmond and DC would cost $12.5 billion. And so we could get that same capacity on rail at a third of the cost. So this Transforming Rail in Virginia initiative is really the foundation for creating an interconnected statewide system. We already have good rail connections. We want great rail connections. And it's going to take a federal partner for all of these things, rail, transit, bikes, and pedestrian trails. We really need a strong federal partner to help with not only funding and really establishing a viable national rail network, but also there are some regulations that could be changed and better support connectivity between states or between major cities. So there are a lot of things we can do. I think we have some opportunities with the current administration's infrastructure plan, and look forward to working with our federal partners on that. But I think that one of the other things we have to do is think creatively about how we solve problems. So it's not just switching to another mode of transportation, but we're also looking at transportation demand management. I mentioned the RM3P program. There's an app that goes with that. My understanding is that some local merchants offer incentives for people to stay and maybe get a cup of coffee and not be on the road for 10 minutes until travel congestion lightens up, those kinds of things. So we have to get creative with technology and look at how we're managing the vehicles that are already out there, and then continue to encourage things like transit. So right now on our express lanes that are HOV3, buses and carpools are free. So I think we can incentivize those behaviors and try to encourage people to use modes of transportation that already exist, that are not single occupancy vehicles. And then, it's a Greater Washington Partnership study showed that employers in the area, while they are seeing their workforces return, they are also expecting some percentage of an increase in telework in the future. So that alone is also a transportation demand management technique that we expect to see grow at least a little bit.
Thank you so much. Yeah, let me see if they still have any more questions. We still have 3 minutes. I can take 1 or 2 questions from the audience, if you have any questions. Yeah, if no question, I just have 1 more question, because I'm very interested in the high-speed rail between Richmond and Washington, D.C. Would you please just talk about what's the current status and what's the perspective for this high-speed rail project between Richmond and the Washington, D.C. Union Station? Yes, I'm very interested.
So clearly we're not quite there yet, but one of the important, I think probably the most important component of our Transforming Rail in Virginia initiative is that we purchased CSX tracks and right-of-way. So the Commonwealth for the first time owns its own rail. And that will allow us to do so many more things, from increasing the frequency of Amtrak passenger rail trips to, building out new rails that are able to support those speeds. The current system cannot. So that will take infrastructure development. But the first step to that is to have the authority to do that. So we now own some of our own tracks and right-of-way. And we also have established the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority to manage those assets. And so we're really excited about the future. We work closely with there's a partnership for high-speed rail on the East Coast, and we are, of course, actively engaged with them and looking to a future for expanded rail in the Commonwealth and all along the East Coast. Thank you all so much for having me today.
Thank you so much. I think we still have 1 minute for the Q&A session, and we do have a last question. Okay, last question from the audience. When you were planning at the significant rail programs, Virginia, did you study any models from other countries? If so, which countries? Did you learn from other countries in terms of this rail program models? Yeah.
Well, I don't have the answer to that question. I can tell you we have a very, very good team at the Department of Rail and Public Transportation. They engage consultants when necessary, and I suspect that happened here. But I have been promised that my contact information will be shared with everyone. So I'm happy to follow up with whoever asked that question if you'd like to send me an email, and I'll figure out which other countries were studied as models. From personal experience, I would say that I certainly appreciate the reliability of the trains in Europe, and and would love to see rail become better used here. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Let's conclude the Q&A sessions. And on behalf of all our wider school urban planning program in particular, I would like to thank Secretary Wight for your wonderful and informative presentation. We all learned tremendously from your presentations. And also I would like to thank all the attendees to make this series, these sessions huge successes. And I sincerely wish everybody have a great and productive summers. Thank you. That's my concluding remark. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. White. Thank you, Dr. Chen and Associate Dean McDougal for this outstanding session and discussion. A lot of note taking, hopefully not just for me, but several others as well. So also a wonderful thank you to each of our participants for attending today's session. We hope you will complete the survey evaluation about the session that you viewed today or participated in. This also includes Wilder School Lunch and Learn sessions. A recording of this session will be made available on the Wilder School YouTube site, and we also share this email with all of our participants. There are also a couple of items to note for everybody. As you will see here in this, as Dr. McDougal mentioned previously, the application deadlines have been extended through July 1st for our graduate certificate programs and for the homeowner looking to continue your education. We hope you choose VCU Wilder School to do that in the realm of public service or nonprofit work. Also, we hope that all of you choose to sign up for a newsletter that we have special. It's called Policy Bite. Where you get bite-sized bits of information, policymakers and so forth, and how to engage and how to use and how we can do things as a Wilder School to enact public policy and research. So please feel free to sign up for that at wilderschool@vcu.edu, and you'll be able to do that. Additionally, one other update. So we are having another Lunch and Learn. That Lunch and Learn will be happening on July the 21st at noon. And our featured speaker will be Mr. William Bill Leidy, discussing his recent column in the Richmond Times-Dispatch, as you will see shared in the chat at this time, where you can actually read that prior to the session for the conversation, which is always great. And in this article, he outlined a path forward for funding relief related to COVID-19, primarily on government spending to maximize support for citizens and to enhance quality of life. I want to say thank you, everyone, for again attending our Lunch and Learn series. And thank you again to Ms. White for your time